To adult Christian education at Pilgrim Congregational Church of Oak Park, Illinois on May 26, 2024. I am Sally Olson, and I'm delighted to welcome you all here in person and online. This month in Adult Ed, we have been focusing on immigration matters, and this Sunday we're going to take a slight turn to discuss a related topic, genealogy. Almost all of our families in this country came from somewhere else. They did not arise from American soil. And in the process of leaving their home countries and coming here, whether through immigration or enslavement, their family histories were disrupted and their connections to their origins were broken. So this morning, we're going to talk about genealogy, and we're going to have a presentation from Pilgrim member Delena Wilkerson, who has been exploring her origins and her ancestors, both enslaved and free. And she's going to share some of the history she's learned and some of the lessons she's learned along the way. Take it away.
So, good morning.
Good morning.
Former President, first of all, let me apologize because I'm going to have to read a lot of my presentation this morning. I hope that's okay. Former President John F. Kennedy called us a nation of immigrants. And except for those, as Sally noted, those of Native American ancestry, we will all trace our heritage back somewhere else. Whether our ancestors came on Mayflower or a slave ship into Ellis Island in New York, Angel Island in California, or Jackal Island in Georgia, via airplane or bus, or by walking by foot, there is a history worth knowing and preserving, though not all of us know our history. I didn't know my family's history, and for various reasons, I didn't think I could ever find out. But luckily, advances in what is available on the internet and the use of DNA testing changed all of that for me. What I have here are pictures of my ancestors. I did not get them from the internet. I actually stole them from my mother, but that's another story. The first picture is my great-grandmother, Geneva, who helped my mother raise me. So I actually knew her until 1970 when she died. This is my great-great-grandfather, Alan Spencer, who I never met, and I will talk a little bit later, never knew. These are, this side is Evelyn, who would be my great aunt, and this is Elizabeth, who is my grandmother, who I also never met because she died before I was born. This is my great uncle Spencer. There are a lot of stories about him that I won't go into, but I also grew up with him. This number 5 at the bottom, these are my parents at prom night. I'm guessing that's when I was conceived. Next to that is his parents, my paternal grandparents, Coy and Nezzy, and my maternal grandparents, that is Elizabeth as a grown-up and Harvey. So what is genealogy research? It is the systematic investigative work required to trace our ancestral history. This is done primarily through official as well as unofficial records, including census data, birth and death data, etc. You might also look, as I did, and find some information in boxes in the basement of your house or in the storage units that you've forgotten about. Recently, especially for those who may or may not have access to physical records, is DNA testing. I have found a lot of information from my DNA search. One of the reasons that is really important to me is about 30 years ago, when Carl was pastor, we had an all-day Saturday group discussing what it would take for Pilgrim to become more inclusive, and it started by asking everybody to go around the room and tell where they are from. I did not know where I was from. Of course, I assumed I was of African descent, but there are 54 countries in Africa, so I had no way of knowing at that time where I would have started. This picture is of the first tree with my mother, and it goes from her to what I eventually found was my fifth great grandmother in 1741, and I will talk about how I got there. Is knowing your genealogy important? I think it is. I also found it to be a lot of fun, the detective work to be a lot of fun. Of course, that wasn't always the case, but within the last 20 years, a lot of ways have been developed, mostly online. So, here's some of my DNA results. You should know that there are different sources use different techniques to determine your origin. The one that I'm showing now is from 23andMe, which shows that I am 86% sub-Saharan African and 11% European. More importantly, for my search anyway, I, according to them, 35% Ghanaian and 32% Nigerian. I also tested through Ancestry.com, which indicated that I am 33% Nigerian and only 28% Ghanaian. It also told me that in its search of DNA results for people who have registered with them, I have 1,772 cousins around the world, up to the fourth cousin, and beyond that, another 18,000 that matched in my DNA, which was fascinating, but not enough. So I also found a third source, which is called AfricanAncestry.com, and it searched my DNA through my mother's side and determined that I am of Yoruban people in southwestern Nigeria, which made me very happy. And this time, Sally put up that map. I was actually pinpoint where I am from, which also made me very happy. So, show of hands, how many of you know the details about your origins? Because I know how far back you go. Tell us how far back you go.
This is Leslie Lauderdale. On my dad's side, we go back to the 11 or 1200s in Scotland.
And how did you get to the U.S.?
We came to the U.S. as colonizers.
Yeah,
On my mom's side,
say who you want.
Kathleen, on my mom's side, we also go back to around 1100. And we have a very interesting, started in Spain, got kicked out for religious reasons, moved to Holland and got kicked out for religious reasons, and then came here for religious reasons.
Excellent. For the rest of you, here's how to get started. Because our ancestors are all now deceased, we can't ask them questions. So physical records become most important. How much money you can and are willing to spend for the search will impact the outcomes. There are, if you don't want to do it yourself, you can start with about $3,000 and pay somebody to do your search. But in point of fact, a lot of it is available for free or low cost online. Now, online has made a huge difference. In fact, the handouts, one of the handouts that is on your chair lists resources. So the first thing you want to do is work from the present to the past, starting with yourself. And this shows me, my parents and grandparents on both sides. And as I began the search, the picture of that cute little girl, that's me. My mother and my great-grandmother, and as I said, my great-grandmother basically raised us both. The second thing you should do is focus on the names. So our names include Spencer, who is the maiden name of my mother and grandmother, McLean, which is the maiden name of my great-grandmother, Siler, my great-great-grandmother, and so forth and so on. When I started this, I started popping up from the census data. I saw that there was a difference in the spelling of McLean. I grew up with the spelling being M-C-C-L-A-I-N, but the census data was showing M-C-L-E-A-N. You will, as you do the census data, you will find differences like this all along, both in how names were spelled. I found differences in who was related to who. Fortunately, there's some of this information I knew, so I knew that some of it was incorrect. So I began to investigate and went back to the 1900s census, where I knew my great-great-grandmother's parents' names. And so I found Henry McLean in the census data, the 1900 census data, and it is clearly spelled M-C-L-E-A-N. The next information I found was related to Henry, as you can see, Henry S. McLean there. And I looked for him because my Uncle Albert, that's his father. And Uncle Albert, I know, spells his name M-C-C-L-A-I-N. This is his World War II draft card, which I found, again, online. And I got this picture from him. He is still alive, in fact, will be 96, 98 on Tuesday. So I asked him the last time I was there, which was just most recent Thanksgiving, what's the deal? Do you know what happened in the spelling of the names? And as it turns out, he is the one who changed the spelling. when he was drafted, when he was filling out the draft card, in the room, there were a lot of other MCLEANs, and he wanted to be different. And just changed the spelling. And when he came home, his parents went along with it, and all of the people, all of his family and brothers, etc., also picked it up. So when I went to the cemetery with Sally, you can see the section, and there's the MCLEAN right next to the MCCLAIN ancestors and relatives. Yes.
I see that you was in Siler City.
Yes, that's right.
Is that related to your relatives in Silers?
Yeah. It's Silers that the area is named for were enslavers. My relatives, the Silers, I have not gone far enough back to make a connection. There are a lot of different Silers in the area. There were also a lot of different Austins. So I haven't been able to make that specific connection, but good question. In the official records, I refer to the census often. The U.S. Census will be your best friend because it has the most information. In case you didn't know, the first population census wasn't until 1790. But it has happened every 10 years since then, except for those who were enslaved. Our names did not appear in the census until 1870. And FYI, the release of the census data is every 72 years. So I just got the data from 1950, which gave me a lot of information, which was released in 2022. The next release will be in 2032.
I think you have to do a fair amount of digging, don't you, in terms of census. I know that different states vary in terms of publication, and Ohio is phenomenal. You can get information very quickly over the internet. Other states are, who cares?
Yeah, part of what made it accessible most for me is I use Ancestry.com. Yes, ma'am.
So, we talk about the U.S. Census, so that's obviously a word for people that is from here. So do you know each country have their own census?
If they have a census, they have their own.
Okay.
There is also a census with the UK, but I didn't look at any other countries. So part of the way I got a lot of information is through my link with the Ancestry.com. And so this just came in, which says at the top, we think we found Timothy Siler's mother. And then it also tells me that William Austin is missing data, or we think we found Jenny, and I got an email message from a relative who I don't know and never knew. So it is always populating and searching when you put in the names and birth dates and death dates. And as a member, it just every week I get some new information, most of which I admittedly have not looked at because it does get to be overwhelming. In the beginning, I knew nothing about my great-grandfather, Alan Spencer. Everyone knew him as Mr. Spencer. I didn't even know his last name, his first name. My great-grandmother never talked about him. My mother never talked about him. So everything I know about the Spencers came from my online searches. I did get a little information from Uncle Albert. I'll just let that go. But it was helpful when I began the search to know what I was looking for. And so from the 1930 U.S. Census, I found him with my great-grandmother, where he is 40 years old at that time. And I know it's far away, so you probably can't see that Geneva is not spelled correctly. But I know it's her. There's Uncle William, who was 18 at the time, and my grandmother was 9 at the time. From that, I was able to get his death certificate. And on his death certificate, I got his parents' names. And they were all, he and they were born in Georgia. So I knew to go to specifically the Georgia census to look for more detailed information about them. And when I did, I found his parents and his parents' parents. His mother, I still haven't found any more information about the slogans. There are, when you get the census data, you can look for people who live next door or nearby them, and there are some other slogans in that census, but it doesn't directly connect her to them. But Alan, when I went back to James Spencer, which became one of the most important sources of information that I got. And as I said before, enslaved people weren't named in the census until 1870. So I have, in fact, the 1870 census for my 3rd grade, 4th grade. I lose track, but it's in there. And Alan Spencer, who took me to James, which is where he lived, who he lived with. I was able to confirm that in the 1880 census, but beyond that, because in 1921, a fire at the U.S. Department of Commerce in the building in D.C. Destroyed the majority of the 1890 population records. So I wasn't able to trace the individuals back any further from that point. However, I have received an abundance of information when I was connected to other relatives that I did not know existed, who had done their searches. So I was able to get information from them. This is a record of
The Georgia militia.
the Georgia militia, which included the freedmen, James and his sons, Alan and Mingo. Alan is my great-grandfather, and their employer is William Lewis. You should remember the name Lewis. The next record that popped up were voting records. The federal registrars enrolled about 80% of the adult males who were formerly enslaved in Georgia between 1865 and 1867. And I had found the July 3rd, 1867 record of qualified voters, which included my great-great-great-uncle, grandfather and his son, Alan. James would have been about 57 at the time, and Alan would have been 27. What you can't see, because I didn't scroll down this far. I didn't want to add more pages to it. Number 72 is W.H. Lewis. In 1850, the census did not include the names of enslaved people. However, at this point, I was able to find, by looking for William H. Lewis, just to see if there was a connection, and found what I believe is James, because he fits the description in 1850. He would have been 40 years old, and obviously black male. And because I know that there was a connection between the Lewis family, I'm assuming that this is him. One of the most notable findings for me came from the former British colonial dependencies slave registers for 1813 to 1834. In 1817, 10 years after the passage of the Abolition of the Slave Trade Act, British plantation owners were required to submit descriptive information about all the enslaved people on their farms. The British had several colonies at the time, including Jamaica. In 1819, the Office for the Registry of Colonial Slaves was established in London, and so copies of their previous records were sent to them. And on one of those records, I found James Spencer. The reason why he is listed as being Creole is because the British decided that if you were born in one of their colonies, you would be Creole. So he would not be Jamaican, he would not be African or whatever. If you were in fact born in Africa, or before you arrived to their colonies, then you would be listed as having been born in Africa.
Yeah.
Yes.
So were you able to find this online too? Because like Henry Louis Gates gets a lot of information from these records, but he makes it sound like you have to like travel to places and put on gloves and stuff to go from.
Well, I got most of this information online by using Ancestry.com, which gave me a link to them, and that's how I got there. The pictures leading it to the Gates, there are records that he probably has access to in Washington that requires the gloves, like our files upstairs. But most of this, as was saying, which made it a huge difference between where I started 20 years ago in the search and what I have access to now, what I'm able to get access to now. So in this case, he was born at he is identified as being at the Portley Estate in St. Thomas in the East Parish of Jamaica. And according to this document, he would have been born in 1810, which is what the census in Georgia says he was born in 1810. And the enslaver, do, if you get a chance, look him up. He has his own famous background. He inherited the estate when his father died, which included 307 enslaved people in one of their estates in Jamaica and 282 in the other estate. His father, who was also named Matthew Lewis, inherited the estate from his father, whose name was William Lewis, who initiated the family's slave ownership in 1754. This is a picture of the route from the bottom, which is where they landed from Africa. They landed at Port Royal in the bottom of Jamaica, and their estate was at the top. He died, Matthew, was interested in the way his enslaved were being treated, and took a few trips from England to Jamaica to check on them. When his last return, unfortunately, he got ill and died and was thrown overboard. Here's a close-up of the slave registry, and you see the arrow at the bottom. That is where I found James. His slave name was Quarry, and they changed his name to when he was baptized by the English, and they changed his name to James Spencer. All of them had, but one of the wonderful things about my research through the English is that they kept that kind of data, so that you have the original African names of the people that they enslaved. And in some, with the males, you have the list of who their mothers were. And so with James, you see he is the son of Diana Scott. Then I went to the list of females, and I find Diana Scott, whose African name was Esther. And as you can note, she is the only one whose mother's name is also there. And her mother was Penelope Lewis. I find Penelope at the top, whose African name was Openi. And at this time, she was 74, and she was, in fact, born in Africa, as it is listed. One of the other things that Ancestry.com also does is they generate a lineage listing through what they call their through lines. And the through lines is designed to help you see how you might be related to your DNA matches. So they look at it, and this is the people who have registered with Ancestry.com. And my tracing, and this starts with my mother, shows that she is related to Alan. The person that I got the email notice from is someone from the Matt Spencer side. I haven't gotten in contact with him yet, but I will. And this takes me all the way up to Penelope Lewis, my fifth great grandmother in 1741. I have also started with the McLean side and found an amazing amount of information. The original McLeans, McLeans, there in fact are a lot of them, and they are in the eastern part of North Carolina, and had started organizing and making connections, and they also have been able to trace the McLean side back to Nigeria as well, but they're closer to the mountains in Nigeria, so I'm looking forward to getting more information on that side of the family. That's it. Questions?
Not questions as much as comments. I've said before that I worked in the room. I worked in the room at Howard University that contained a lot of records that were both sent there or dumped there, and not only by family members, but by people who had property all over the East Coast and the southern United States. And the family later, while not admitting of anything to slavery, would dump the records of those places. The second one, we were asking about the glove kind of research. I know at the Chicago Historical Society and other places, I've been to one in Ohio that does it too, and it used to be here that the Mormons had a library. But where they would allow you to do the paper searches and whatever, that you could lay your hands on. But the price was that you had to organize the box that they had there. So they were gathering together information by having the clientele organize it. And most recently, from what I can hear from Smithsonian and other places, is that they have volunteers and college students who are now helping to put these things, including microfiche, everything else, online by putting it in so that we don't lose those records that are now what we call paper burning, that are burning up, or that are becoming less and less able to discern what the information is on there. And finally, two surprising things to me on our family search was not just the draft card, but also discharge papers that my father had that showed where he enlisted for World War II, and he was a roamer. He was roaming around, I guess they won't get me, they're hopping on freight trains and that kind of thing, going around the country. And we're able to trace those stories that he actually told us because of where he enlisted, where he was sent back to be trained, and where he was released, which was up in Montana. Which, you wonder why he was there, but he had to read that story. But also, we had a great-grandmother who was able to tell the family, oral histories in our family are big, going back and document them even bigger. She remembered that as a small child, she was taken from the Gold Coast, and that gave us a lot of information that says to me, we're a little north of you, more toward Ghana and Senegal in that area. There. And finally, with the name changes, my father and his brothers did that same thing too. It also, as my mother and her sisters say, because they accompanied her mother through many a childbirth, well, you can't assume not only that the records aren't clear, but the record input by people who were less literate than sometimes the family they were working with. They have a lot of misspellings, a lot of mistakes, and that kind of stuff in there too.
Yeah, the list that I gave you is a link to includes a link to the greater, Latter-day Saints, the Mormons, which is all those records are now online. And I put those that charge, I put the amount that they charge on the list. Yes, ma'am.
I was pleased that you included baptismal names from the English registers, depending upon where your family heritage is. There are you can often find information in baptismal records especially in European countries.
Yes. The U.S. documents are not that clear, but the records I found a surprising number of information about the African Americans, which in 1870, when the people of African descent were listed by name, they were not considered U.S. citizens. Correct. And so that didn't happen until later in the census records. Yes.
Hi. My question is, and I know you and I have talked about this before slightly. So my ancestry goes like nowhere. It's myself and my mom, and even information there is non-existent. I actually reached out to one of my sisters the other day to ask if there was any records that they had regarding my mom. Definitely nothing regarding my dad. So how does that work if you don't have anything to connect anything to?
DNA testing, do the
Okay.
DNA, and it will, as I have now, 1,700 new relatives.
Okay.
If you are on at least Ancestry.com, and there's another one I'm blanking on.
23andMe.
23andMe, but yes, 23andMe will also pop up people who share your DNA. And you can use those whether you want it or not. And you don't have to respond to them. And I obviously have not responded to the 1,700 relatives that popped up on mine, at least not all of them. But it will organize that information for you in your membership page. What I just passed out was I did the Spencer chapter of the book that I'm so-called working on to show you, which has more information than what I shared this morning.
This is Kathleen again. 2 hints. One, if you're lucky enough to have a brother, have them do their DNA testing as well, because there's information on the Y chromosome that's not on X chromosome. So if you have a brother and you're worried they might not be around a while, maybe convince them. I keep trying to push my cousins, which you would be a further match, but no luck so far. Also, the OPRF library still has their microfiche. I actually found I have relatives that lived in Oak Park, not too far from where I lived, back in the 20s, which I had no idea. So to research some of those things, and you might even find like cool things, like I know like I have newspaper clippings that like my great-grandfather, I don't know, won this award or that award, so.
Cool. Yes, ma'am.
Oh, I just wanted to comment a little further. When you can't time your DNA or haven't started that yet, there's also lengthy records from Social Security where they don't give you the personal information or the numbers, but you can see when people became eligible, but they were born back toward the end of the 19th century and that kind of thing, and you can start connecting to work records. My family also had the quasi state or federal type of information because they were connected to railroads, if they were connected to the railroad industry, if they had any kind of licensure, like nurses, teachers, doctors, anything that required a state identity or license, you can begin making those connections. That's all I got.
What state you're in, yes.
One other one from just online. I can't remember the name of the source, but a lot of my relatives in the States are from the South. And there was an organization that was putting all the local newspapers online and searchable online. So that was really helpful in terms of whether it was somebody graduated, somebody got in a car crash, filling in some of the connections for like how might I search other people who might be related to these people. Plus, then sometimes just filling in the stories about the people.
Yes.
That's kind of cool.
And also, there's a Find the Grave, which I think is on the list, which also leads you to other information, obituaries, and their bulletins at the funerals also tends to list the names of the relatives who were present or not.
Public libraries will give you access to databases you'd otherwise have to pay for, like the Tribune archives. Many libraries will give you free or limited free access.
Yeah. Not all of them do it, because I haven't been able to get it for free in North Carolina, for example.
Right, because
The Oak Park Library, being an Illinois library, not only has this stuff online, some of their databases are online from a person's home. So you don't actually have to be, some you actually have to go into the library, but I've done a fair amount of that, and if people would like to talk with me about how to log on and what you might find, feel free to connect with me at some point.
Now, was that book?
The other thing that got a lot of feedback from on Ancestry.com and the other one was, this person may be connected to you, but we found this name. So we do end up having to go through and eliminating people who you know are not related, even though they may have the same name.
That may be my heritage.
So did you generate that book yourself, or did Ancestry?
No, I did.
Okay.
Yeah, I've been doing this about 4 years.
Photos,
Yeah.
those all came from your mom?
Yeah.
But they're not like widely available?
No. Well, some of them are from other members of the family who've done a search.
Also, you can search military records in the United States.
Military records. And you can get records and information from all over the world if they have that information. There's a lot of records from the British, for example, and
and there are some records that are.
There's also Mexican records.
Yes.
Because I found a relative who left the United States past post-enslavement and went to Mexico. And I can trace his family in Mexican, the Mexican census.
One other thought on that, and so in our family we watch a lot of Henry Louis Gates. But one of the things that I didn't realize until I went to the African American Museum in DC was the difference between the transatlantic slave trade and the domestic slave trade.
Yes.
And one of the things that happens with that is you also then gen up a lot of tax records and other records that are kept because of that. And so it turns out there are lots of different sources. It's you kind of have to put on different mindsets about the things that were going on to figure out where might I look for that.
Yes. In the McLean side of my family, there are, because they kept the names of their enslavers. I have a lot of wills that list Hugh McLean left Jenny and Joe's wife to his son Eric, etc. So I have a lot of those records too that will come up when I do the McLean side. Those records did not exist on the Spencer side because, from my view, this James stayed with his original enslavers, the Lewis family.
Well, it's been a fascinating review, and I hope you learned something out of it. This will wrap up our immigration series for the month. Thank you all for coming and for your interest in these topics.
Before we sign off, I'd just like to remind you that next week we will be live streaming Claiming Grant from Sunday schools, or from Adult Ed. We're going to have more or less a sort of a panel discussion or a interview kind of format. And so bring your questions of what it's like to be a drag queen, what she may or may not have faced in her life in terms of persecutions or successes, and the impact she's making on the Christian world as being, a former Christian, a former evangelical, now drag queen, with the #1 hit on the Christian charts. So that's next week. And then this summer, there's a new thing. Gloria will be leading her the Bible study that has been ongoing. We're going to have that as adult ed session, 6 sessions this summer. So look in the tidings and watch for it. It will not be live streamed, but it will be Zoomed. So check out the tidings and for more information. Thank you so much. We'll see you next week.